Welcome to Enroute, the podcast of the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute. The First Responder Behavioral Health Institute is bringing together some of the most inspiring and dedicated change agents in the global public safety, psychotherapy, and educational communities. Each episode of Enroute seeks to bring together first responder change agents and clinicians dedicated to constructively disrupting the status quo by tackling the tough subjects like first responder suicide, post-traumatic stress, moral injury, sanctuary trauma, leadership development, critical incident response, peer support teams, and what it means to be psychologically safe and healthy while working in an unsafe world. All units, please stand by. The Enroute podcast is about to begin. You can resume normal traffic on this channel after this transmission. I'm Joseph Brigandi. Welcome to this edition of Enroute. Today we welcome Marc Hill to the show. He's a firefighter paramedic, a teacher, a speaker, a best-selling author of the book Too Dark 30, True Stories to Inspire Teaching and Learning in Our Local Heroes, and the companion workbook by the same name. Too Dark 30 gives us insights into training first responders and the importance of education and continuing education as we progress throughout our careers. Marc will be speaking at the Louisiana Firefighters Conference and at the Wisconsin Emergency Instructors Conference in February 2024. You can also catch him teaching his courses on our platform, the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute. Let's welcome Marc Hill to Enroute. Good morning, Marc.
Good morning. How's everybody doing?
Very well. I'm glad you could join us. I wanted to go ahead and talk a little bit about your book today, Too Dark 30, and just generally introduce everybody to you and some of the fine work that you're doing. Fill us in on your background. You're an educator, firefighter, paramedic, man of all seasons. Tell me more.
Jack of all trades, master of none, yes.
Yeah. Well, there you have it.
I started out as a teacher. I did. I started out in education. I went to Michigan Tech University up in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. I went there, changed majors twice, ended up in teaching social studies, left there, started teaching social studies in Antigo, Wisconsin. And I taught U.S. history, I taught economics, I taught geography. I taught there for 4 years. Then with budget crunches, I was reduced from my position and got another job teaching in middle school. At that point, I was teaching 6th and 7th grade, world history and geography. And I taught there for 4 years until I got reduced again with budget cuts. And at that point, I had had my master's degree to be a principal, did my principalship, did all that stuff. And I was actually union president at the time when I got finally laid off for the last time, and went into firefighting because I'd always done volunteer firefighting at the same time. And my dad was a volunteer firefighter, but he was adamant about me not being a knuckle dragger. So he wanted me to, no, you're going to go to school and you're going to go and actually get a degree and do things. I don't want you, doing this. So went into the firefighting full-time. Here in Wisconsin, you really need your paramedic to be a full-time firefighter. There's a couple departments that don't require a paramedic license, but for the most part, everyone has to be a paramedic. So I went back, got my paramedic license, which was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I'll be honest with you. I joke, but I'm totally serious that I'm still waiting for a national registry to send me a letter saying, no, even though it's been, 10 years, I think we screwed your test score up and you really did not pass. So I'm still waiting for that letter to come from someplace saying that I didn't do it, because it literally was one of the hardest things, because it was so outside my wheelhouse. Having been a social studies teacher for all those years, you have so much information that's just right in the front. So when I went back to school, And I had to relearn basically all these different new things, because it's not like I was teaching science or human anatomy at the time. I was just teaching history and world history and economics and geography. So I really had to buckle down, and I really had to go through and reteach myself how to do all these things in the paramedic level that is so much farther advanced than just my normal first responder EMT level that I was doing. So that was a huge challenge for me. I mean, that was a lot of work. And then finally, I got a job here where I live in Red Mountain, where I was firefighting, and I was paramedic. And then I took the leap and became a fire chief, full-time chief in our neighboring suburb of Rothschild. I was there for a year and then got reduced again. They thought it was going to be good to have a full-time chief, and then when budgets came around, they're like, maybe we don't need a full-time chief. So it's like, okay. So then I finally got into where I am now at the Wausau Fire Department. So I've been there now for eight years, but the whole time I've also been teaching. I've been an adjunct instructor at our local community college. So for that whole time, 13 years now, I've been teaching at the college level, adults and things like that. So it was quite an adventure, quite a jack of all trades. Like I said, during that whole time, I was, coaching football, and I was head girls track coach for a number of years, and, had all kinds of great experiences. And I loved doing all those things. And that's why I wrote the book. I wrote the book because I was that person that once I got to where I was in the Wausau Fire Department, I was always that guy. Well, Marc was a teacher. We'll have Marc teach all the new people, and not that I was voluntold to be that person, but at the same time, I relished that because I enjoy teaching. So I was like, yeah, sure, no problem. I can go through, and I'll be the preceptor, and I'll be the guy training. But being a full-time department, we have 3 crews. So I was on B shift. So therefore, there was 2 other shifts, A and C, that did not have me to relay information. So I was always getting questions, and Marc, how do you go about doing this, and how do you do that, and what would be the best way to quiz people and test people and explain to people and all those different things. So unfortunately, I was off with a back injury. I always call for lifting assistance. So when I was off on my back injury, that's when I had the time to write the book, because I was like, well, I can answer all the emails and I can text, all the different things, but it's like, well, I'll just write a book. So I put it all my knowledge that I had over the past 20 plus years in education, I tried to pour it into that book and try to tell stories, because I'm a big believer in stories, and I think that stories will, be the best driver for people to remember, and to give context and things like that. So that's why it's called True Stories, to inspire teaching and learning, because, it's one thing to read a book. I think we've all read, textbooks, and it's just like, oh my gosh, you're 20 pages in. It's like, I don't even remember what I was reading. I don't even recall what was going on, because we all zone out, because it's just like, oh, you got to grab people's attention. You can tell me the why, what were the reasons behind things? Those are the important and the inspiring things that people remember from stories, So I learned that early when I was teaching, especially history, because a lot of people don't like sitting through history class. So I was always looking for, the weird, the wild, the dramatic kind of stories to tell the kids in class. Like, hey, why did World War I happen? Why did World War II happen? Why did the Bay of Pigs disaster occur? Why did, all these different things that happened through U.S. history? I mean, I was looking for the stories, and the kids really, they really took to that. So I carried that through with all of my teaching that I do now.
I think it comes out in your book. I love your book. It's heavily earmarked, and I find it to be highly accessible. I truly enjoyed it. And it's something that any training officer can go ahead and utilize. as a companion to help them get through it. We share a lot in common. I'm a firefighter paramedic, 35 years, training officer, master's in education, and I've worked in the middle school, high school population as well as with our firefighters. So I'm going to go ahead and ask a very interesting question.
Yeah.
Which population do you find to be more challenging, the middle schooler or the firefighter paramedic?
Oh, honestly, I never really had a problem with either. I know people are like, oh, come on, Mark. But I really did, because I'm 6'2" and I'm 250, and I can bark with my football coaching voice if I need to. So I can be pretty intimidating. So I never really had a problem with discipline. I'll be honest with you. I really didn't. And, what I thought was hilarious, I'll share a story. I love sharing stories. So when I was teaching high school, so I was teaching a lot, 11th grade and seniors, right? So kids are kids, and it kind of doesn't matter how old, quote unquote, how old they are, right? Because seniors, there's a certain aspect that, you get the senioritis, and I want to get out of school. I'm done. I've done my bit for king and country. I want to get out, and I'm an adult, and I want to live the life, which is fine, and I understand that. 7th and 8th graders are very similar, right? Because they're at the end of their middle school journey. They think they're the kings of the hill, and they are in their school, and they want to get on to the next level. So they have very similarities between those two groups. But strangely enough, it was hilarious. The kids, when I had 11th graders, when I had juniors, and I'd give them different projects and different things we could work on to try to bring in, make things interesting, right? Here's 10 different things you could choose from. Pick the one that you're interested in doing. Find the thing that you're interested in and do it. Come up with something. I had more juniors relish the opportunity to not write a term paper of 10 pages in APA style, double spaced. They would rather take the creativity. I had some of the coolest sugar cube castles that were created and like artistic dioramas of the Civil War that they made out of the salt flour, and then paintings and things like that with, they took the time to take a toothpick and create all these different little fences, making a diorama of a battlefield. I mean, it was incredible work. And they loved the opportunity that they loved to have that chance to do that. That I wasn't going to be that teacher. No, you're going to write a paper, and this is what we do because this is what happens when you get to college, which unfortunately is true in a lot of, in a lot of aspects. But for me, it was more about, are you going to remember something? Yeah, you're going to write plenty of term papers in your life, especially if you're going to go to college, right? You're going to do that. You're going to do tons of that work. You're already probably doing that in English class already anyway. I want you in my class to actually come away with something. I want you to actually learn something. I want you actually to apply and to remember the whys, right? So giving those kids the opportunity to be creative was a huge thing, and they ran away with it. They thought it was the best thing in the world. And that was juniors and seniors, and that goes right back to my 6th and 7th graders too. They relished the opportunity to be able, to pick something that they're interested in, have that freedom, right? I told them, I said, listen, you can do whatever you want as long as it's on this list that I created. But at the same time, you have the freedom to do and to finish the project in whatever way you want to. And some of it was, well, can I work with Joey over here, and can we both do that? I'm like, yeah, that's fine, but make sure the work is, even between the two of you, because I've been in a number of group projects where I ended up doing most of the work. So it's just like, yeah, but I always kept, you always got to, as a teacher, you got to keep your eye on, some of that stuff with the younger kids. But I never really had a problem with discipline. I never had a problem with, between the two age groups. They all have their positives and negatives. They all come with their certain, uniqueness, and at the different ages, but at the same time, they all have their great positives too. And there's certain things I love to be able to do and, talk with the seniors, a little more serious because they're getting out, so it's just like, all right, hey, when you're out on your own now, you're an adult, you're 18, you're fully an adult. So you got to be careful of these things. And, especially when we were talking economics, it's like, hey, this is what minimum wage pays, so
Yeah.
you got to save your money, don't blow it, so I mean, we went through all those different things. So it's funny how education is, because when I've taught adults too, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Whether, I had certain people, when I was fire chief, I had a number of people that were 68, 70 years old still on the department, and they had 40 plus years experience. And then I had other people that I had just brought in, just hired, that were 19, 20 years old. So talk about knowing your audience, and when you're a teacher, you got to know who your audience is and who, what levels you're going to talk to. You're spanning whole generations at that point. So I found that when I was doing the instructing and when I was doing a lot of those teaching aspects, as long as you kept the message on point, and as long as you were clear and you had some stories to back you up about why we're doing certain things, this is the why, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone came together and everyone connected.
One of the whys I really enjoyed in your book, and we realize now we're transitioning from the middle schooler and the high schooler to the much more challenging population, the firefighter. At least for me, I found it to be.
Well, yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, there's I bet I got some guys that I've worked with that's like, man, I don't know if you ever got out of middle school, right? I think some on the male aspect too, it's just like, we never really grow up. I think we all kind of age, but we never truly grow up at some points.
Absolutely. And that is a good thing. Now, in your book, you talk about the fight or flight response psychology in emergency situations and teaching them how to slow down in a crisis. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So as you know, coming into from the psychological aspect, we all have that mechanism, right? When something bad happens or we hear a big boom and we kind of, dart, and it's one of those reactions that it's an innate thing. Right. It's embedded in our psychology. It's embedded in the way we are as human beings. So you need to train that out. In the military, you'd have, snipers and, different things where you purposefully go through and you make loud, bangs, and, you'd shoot over their heads with blanks. You'd recreate the environment that they're supposed to be completely focused on your target without flinching. Right. It's the same kind of fact when we're in the, in the first responder industry, in the fire and EMS services. You have to see the big picture. Don't get that tunnel vision of like, oh my God, this person's bleeding out. What am I going to do? Right. So when it comes into training those individuals, hence the name of my book was Too Dark 30. The reason why I had the name was because, in my aspect, everything bad happens at 2:30 in the morning, right? In the military terms, dark is meaning after midnight. So, everything, the proverbial hits the fan at bar close. Here in Wisconsin, it's 2 a.m. So, everything happens, when it's the middle of the night, it's rained, or it's in the middle of a snowstorm or whatever. It's pitch black. You can't see anything. There's a multi-car pile up. There's people. There's bodies hanging out. There's things, all the horrible, traumatic things that we've witnessed. But in the education realm, you're dealing with people that haven't seen those things yet. They haven't touched, which is good and bad, right? They haven't been exposed to those things. So you have to physically, train them how to not get that tunnel vision, how to not want to run, how to, if you're in the firefighting situation, you've got, everything's all blacked out and, you can feel the heat. I can't see anything. All I can do is breathe, but you have to calm your breathing, right? You only have so much air. And if you're in a situation where you're, a firefighter down incident, or, you're an entrapment incident and you've been cut off from the rest of your partner or whatever, you need to train that individual to, okay, stop, reassess. Are you hurt? Are you injured? All those different responses that we all train to do when we're in the fire industry. What's your air level? What's your situation? Where's your location? All those, those kind of things. But you have to physically train the person to, okay, I have to conserve my energy. I have to conserve my breathing. Can I turn my pass alarm on? Can I do it? Is there a flashlight? Do I see any kind of light that I can try to, is there something by me? Do I have a tool still with me that I can just bang on a wall or try to let people know where my location is? All those different things. That is a training thing. You have to train someone to be able to do those things. And that takes repetition and practice, right? Because it's not a normal thing.
Yeah.
They always say, right? Normal people don't run into a building that's on fire, so you that's a trained thing. Police don't, they have to be trained to go into that school if there's an active shooter. They have to, the military, it's not normal for people to want to run around shooting guns at other people. I mean, that's a trained thing. Yeah. Okay. You have to physically go through the training and the process to do that. So you have to work that part out of your brain. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're ever going to get rid of it, right? You're always going to have there's that little person in the back of your head thinking, hey, this is bad. And, you should probably get the hell out of here right now, right? But you have to have that training has to kick in to say, okay, just relax, take a breath, find out what's going on here. What can I do right now, right? What is under my power right now, right? Yeah. And if it's in a, emergency scene, if it's a, it's a paramedic type incident, we've got, walking into a 28-year old or a 28-week, premature birth. That was something. Mm-hmm. Right. It's just like, I walk into the room and there's my, another med group is there and there he is holding 2 little feet. Yeah. It's just like, okay, hey, it's go time. You're it. You can't run. There is no run aspect to this. You have to fix this, so try your best to try to fix it, and I tell my students all the time too, when it's like, listen, especially in this service, a lot of us are type A personalities. We, we think we're invincible. We think we're strong. We all these different things, which is true to a point. But at the same time, we have to understand and realize, and it's really important that we realize that we didn't start that emergency. We didn't cause the problem, right? We didn't cause the car accident. We didn't cause the shooting to occur. We didn't cause that 28-week, baby to come out prematurely full breech. We didn't cause the issue that we are responding to. And it's important that we understand that, listen, you didn't cause the problem. It's not your fault that it occurred. What you can do is control what you can do, right? You're called to try to remedy that issue. You try to do the best job you can into fixing whatever that problem is. So, a lot of people forget that, like, oh, they put so much weight on themselves that I failed, right? I failed, saving that person, or I failed, extricating that individual, or I failed finding the fire in time before it spread to the, the attic, or whatever our failures are, right? We're really hard on ourselves, more than we need to be. Yeah. And we need to realize and remember, we didn't start that fire, mm-hmm. right? We didn't, whatever the issue, we didn't cause that drunk driver to swerve over that center line and smack those, we didn't cause that. Mm-hmm. All we can do is what we can do in our response to when we do get that call.
You transition nicely in your book to empathy and compassion. And I think it's important for us to go ahead and discuss it here. Empathy and compassion for the public, for their own suffering, but also empathy and compassion for ourselves. That self-doubt, that blaming that we'll often do after an incident, can sometimes haunt first responders. And, often is one of the many reasons they come to see me, as I'm also a board-certified psychotherapist. And I keep that down at the fire stations. I show up there to do my shifts and get my CEUs. And I was working with my current crew for about 2 years before somebody let it slip that I was also a therapist. And then they were all talking about their concern. Do you think he's psychoanalyzed us? I'm like, it's too late, guys. Too late. But talk to me about empathy and compassion. You cover it a little bit in your book, and tell us a little bit more about it.
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? We only have so much to give. And I think that's the other important part that we need to realize, that we're not robots. We only have so much in a tank, right? Or, my battalion chief used to call it, the bucket, right? And every call that we go to is one more drip in that bucket. And once that bucket starts to overflow, when it's time to walk away. That's what he would always say. And that's true. And I think that, all the calls that we go to, everyone that we respond to, and every person that we come in contact with, a lot of that is true, that every one of those instances is another drop in that bucket. The problem that I have with that analogy is we fill our buckets right to the brim, right? And in today's society, people are calling 911 for everything, and it's unfortunate. I wish we'd do a lot better job of, trying to disseminate the message of 911 is for emergencies only, right? Life or death situations. Don't call if you have a headache. Call if you fell and now you have a headache, right? But at the same time, I mean, it's one of those things, right? It's a fine line. It's one of those caveats, like, well, how do we do that? And it's $1 million question, but that's separate. That's separate to the whole situation, right? But the problem is that we're responding to every single call multiple times, and some of the calls are the same call over and over and over again, right? It's all the repetitive, the frequent flyers, all the constant, the same thing that's going on over and over and over again, which, right, is the definition of insanity and crazies, doing the same thing and expecting different results. So the fact that we're constantly called to all these different things every single time, even though it's something you've seen, you could have seen the same kind of call 20 times, right? 30 times, 50 times, 100 times. You could have responded 100 times over the course of your career, but that's 100 different drops in that bucket. That even though it's the same call, it is the same call, and you're still physically having to deal with the psychology, the visuals, the empathy, all those different things, the situation itself. Even though, I've been here 1 million times, I know what's going on here. That's fine, but guess what? That's another drip in your bucket. So I think it's also important that we need to try to take some of that water out of the bucket, right? So that people's buckets don't fill up too quickly, and I think that's kind of what's going on today. And I think that's, some of the problem is that, people don't understand how to cope with with all these multiple, it's the mini stresses, I think, that accumulate faster than the big traumas, right? Because big traumas big traumas, as bad as they are, they're a little easier to deal with because you can identify it, right? I went on this call, I did, this thing, or this was the situation that someone else got hurt, or God forbid, someone else that had died, or whatever the situation. You can identify point blank, okay, that call, I will admit, has hurt me. I know that. You can work with that. Because I can identify that. I can try to work through the best ways to cope and to strategize and to, alleviate all those different things. But I also think that it's important that we understand that it's not going to go away, right? It'll be with you forever. It's just a matter of how much you want to let that incident bother you or kind of fester in your mind, that makes you want to think about it constantly, or, whatever the situation is, So dealing with empathy and dealing with those kind of multiple little micro traumas, I think that saps us a little more, because those are the ones that we forget. Mm-hmm. Not that we forget literally, but that we don't realize how much, like death by 1,000 cuts, right? Yeah. Those ones I think add up more over the course of a career than having, 5 identifiable major incidents that occurred that I can, on one hand, I can tell you this is what this and then this and then this, it's the death by the 1,000 cuts. That's what's going to get you more, I think, in my personal opinion, because those are the ones that you don't realize that you're giving all that empathy, right? Because you've been there so many times, you don't realize how much it's really taking away from you, And it's important that we do, the teaching aspect comes straight in, because a lot of the newer people, especially at our department, we've got people that are coming in with absolutely zero life experience. Like literally, this is their first full-time job. Yeah. They've never driven an ambulance. They've never driven a fire truck. They were never a volunteer coming in. They have no experience at all. They're fresh, fresh out of the box, as they say, right? Where, I don't want to be that old guy, but, years ago, you had to be an EMT for 2 years before you could even get to be a paramedic. Yeah. That used to be a rule, but because of the way things are today, you don't have, it's like, well, okay, thank God you're breathing and you can walk. Yeah. Come on in here. We'll teach you what's going on. And it's just like, man, there's so many people that are getting into the job thinking that it's just like they see on TV and in the movies, and it's not. This is not, Chicago fire.
There you go.
It is not like that, like at all. Emergency back in the 70s was far more accurate than Chicago fire is today. So it's just like, we need to, and I don't want to scare people out of the job. I want you to be here. I want you to be here, to work with me. Absolutely. But I think it's important that we're honest with everyone, and we say, listen, this is, bad things happen to everybody, right? Everyone has a few bad things. Everyone's parents are going to die. You're going to have to deal with that. Their grandparents are, we're all going to deal with death. The problem is we don't deal with just 4 or 5, people dying in our lifetime. We deal with hundreds or thousands of people dying in our lifetime, and seeing all that we see. And that is beyond what normal people will see and interact with, So it's super important that we are honest with everyone and that we share with them, truly positive ways to cope with things. Because I don't want to see people, go down the negative road, because that ain't going to help anybody, and you're going to hurt more people that are in the industry by taking a negative route than trying to find a positive solution to, a person's personal issues.
Yeah. One of the things I try to teach, and one of the mantras I try to run through my first responders and pretty much all of my clients, self-care is not selfish, straight up.
No.
I run 2 crisis response teams that run statewide and bring therapists to line of duty deaths and to fire stations for debriefings. And I shut the phone down 4 to 6 hours, 24 hours. There's always somebody to pick up that call, but I have to unplug, especially after major incidents. How do you take care of yourself? What's your self-care strategy?
That's a great question. Yeah. What does Mark do? Yeah. Honestly, the book really helped a lot. I'll be honest with you. It did. It got a lot of, things off my mind. Telling stories, I think, helps in doing with that. Teaching itself is very cathartic for me because I try to impart that knowledge, and I try to help them, so in that kind of giving and sharing, I think helps, at least for me, on top of that, I live here in Wisconsin, so I do a lot of hiking in the natural realms. So I do a lot of hiking. I like working out. I used to be far more fit and, cut up and swollen than I am right now. But, I do find, lifting helps a lot. Forcing yourself to do things like that really helps a lot. Now, after having my back injuries, I can't lift like I used to, Joe. But at the same time, you got to try to find positive things, right? I love candy. And, I could go through and I could balloon to hundreds of pounds, if I would just let myself go. But, it's like anything. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Right. It's not the quick fix. Mm-hmm. Like emotional eating was always, it's something that I've dealt with forever. Right. Cause, as a kid, it's like, well, Mark's, hurt. Well, here, we'll get you. Well, here's a popsicle, or here's the, whatever. So then what do you instantly, correspond pain to? It's like, oh, I need a sweet treat to make myself feel better. And yeah, you do for like, 10 seconds and then it's gone. It's a lot like drinking. Drinking helps you, put the problems away and makes you feel great for a little while. And then we wake up and you're hungover and the problem's still there.
Yeah.
So it's just like, finding ways to get rid of, or, finding ways to process those things That's, for me, that's really what it is. And, some of it's, like I said, I have a lot of Legos, so I like putting Lego. My girls, I got 3 daughters, so luckily they like putting Legos together too. So, having to concentrate on little things, helps to, try to process, all the things that are in your mind too. And just spending time with my family is great too.
All right. I got to ask, what is your, you don't have a few Legos.
No, I don't have a few.
You have a lot of Legos.
I have a lot of Legos. Yeah.
What's your favorite Lego set? Tell me.
I like the space stuff.
Okay.
I'm a nerd. I will fully admit. Although I don't know if you can't really. I got a lot of nerdy things on my bookshelf over here. There's a Darth Vader that's over there, and I got a Boba Fett helmet over there. So yeah, I'm a nerd. I'm a Trekkie, and I also like Star Wars, which is, I know, faux pas for a lot of people. Like, no, you have to pick one. It's like, no,
Yeah.
they have their positives and their negatives.
Yes,
they come
they
in
do.
different things. It doesn't have to be either or. I like them both. I like sci-fi stuff. So I liked the space. Yeah, there you go. Right, live long and prosper. Infinite diversity through infinite possibilities.
Yes.
So. Yeah, I like the space stuff. I did. I probably almost have every space set that Lego's done in the last, 20 years. But
So,
yeah.
How many Legos do you have?
Sets? Oh, geez. I think the last time I counted, I had over 300 different sets.
Yeah.
Which is... The one that I have that's worth the most is actually it's a cavalry Old West set from when I was in high school. It's called Fort Legoredo. That sucker's worth like $1,100, which is ridiculous. But
jeez. Well, one of the things it gives us though is to zone us into what I call present moment awareness. You're not thinking about anything else. You're just building the Lego set. You're involved in that moment. And that's one of the things that we try to teach. So many clients of mine have post-traumatic stress of some level, and most of them do not have post-traumatic stress disorder. They only think they do. They're showing signs and symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And one of the ways to get them to go ahead and focus, a lot of clinicians will put them into meditation, and that doesn't work. And they'll go ahead and try to get them into some other activity that stills the mind, and they don't realize that a lot of traumatized people struggle with that. But if you can get them into building Legos, if you can get them into fishing, it's the same activity. It's just done differently. We're not on a cushion listening to music. And I encourage that, yoga, Tai Chi. I do a Qigong routine every day myself. And those are very, very valuable things, but a lot of traumatized people can't do them. The trick with the building of the Legos, the trick with fishing, Frank Viscuso, we had him on an episode or so ago, and he is very, very proud of the time that he spends coaching Little League. And because nothing else exists, he's with the kids and he's worried about them, focused on the growing them. And then he looks up and, with baseball, it's, 3 hours or 3 days, the game's over. But then you go ahead and engage life again. So the present moment awareness, when you're sitting here focused in, anxiety is focused in being focused and thinking about the future. Depression is often rooted in the past. You can be neither of those things if you're focused on the present and you're zoned in. And I think that's one of the things that the Legos give you. You mentioned something else that you like to do, which being in Texas stunned me, sitting in the sun. This has something to do with where you're located, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Well, and to be honest with you, so when I went to my undergrad, right, when I was up in Michigan Tech, it's a great school, Michigan's toughest university, right? That's what MTU stands for. But it's not for everybody. It's not, and they tell you that straight up when you get there, like. Literally, first day when you're in freshman orientation, they bring you into the ice arena and everyone sits there, right? And they do the classic, everyone look to your left and everyone look to your right. By the time you graduate, you or one of the people next to you will not be here. And that's 100% accurate for that university. Like literally the washout rate's over 30%. So, you come in with a freshman class of I think we had like 2,000 or so. And then when you graduate, you're graduating with, 700 people, or 750 people, So it's just like, they weren't wrong. So some of it was just the rigors of the academics, because Michigan Tech, because it's a technological university, it is a heavily engineering based school. I initially went there for geologic and mining engineering. Hindsight being what it is, but at the same time, I switched out of that. But it's a rigorous academically school, so it's quite hard. I had a 26 on my ACT, and I was the dumbest person in my hall through ACT scores. Like everyone else was like, oh, I have a 28, I had a 30, I had a 29, I had a 31. It's like, wow, I have a 26, and I thought I was pretty good. Nope, I was low here, So it's, that part's fascinating, So, but at the same time, it's also an Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and you have to realize that up there, you are on the Keweenaw. So the Keweenaw is a peninsula that juts right up into Lake Superior, and Lake Superior is the deepest and largest Great Lake. So we would get lake effect snow all the time, and it was always gray. Like the sun, once it got into October, and I grew up in the UP, so there were numerous times when I was trick-or-treating with my snowsuit on, going to houses. My dad would give us pillowcases and, hey, don't come back until this pillowcase is full. So we went out, and I mean, that was back in the old days when you could, trick or treat in the dark and there was no adult with you, it was just like, don't come back until this bag was full. And then he proceeded to pour out our candy on the floor of the living room and then take a third of all of our candy. And he's teaching us about government. Ouch. So, it was funny at the time, but at the same time, he was making a point, but it was gray all the time because it was overcast all the time. And it was, like I said, it was snowing. Like we would get inches of snow by October. So that was not a normal thing. I mean, that was not an unnormal thing. So it's unless you're used to that. And then the amount of snow, like I was born in January. So my birthday, we would always have snowbanks out in our yard that were over 6 feet high. Like it looked like you were walking through World War I trenches to get to the road or, whatever. Because literally we had just literal 3 to 4 feet of sitting snow in the yard. Then the snowbanks themselves were well over 6+ feet. The city would come through every so often and carve the banks down so that you could pull out of your driveway safely or you could turn corners safely. And, that's a lot of snow. And the thing about that much snow is it doesn't go away until like June. Like literally we would still have snowbanks. There were still piles of, dirty snow and ice literally in June. And then think about, okay, well, if the snow's not, that we still have snowbanks in June and then it starts snowing again in August, what does that mean, right? You've got maybe, June, July, August, September, you got maybe 4 to 5 months of sun. And then she turns gray again, It's not so. It wasn't for everybody, and we had happy lamps.
Happy lamps
at the university. Yeah, they called them happy lamps. Those, we had replacement. They were they're supposed to mimic sunlight. Okay. The frequency of sunlight and the actual light itself, because it was so gray. It was gray and overcast like all the time, And then because we were more north, it would be dark all the time too. Like you'd only have sunlight from about 8 o'clock until maybe about 4:30, and then the sun would never get very far up the horizon. It's not like summer where it's over your head. It was like, no, it's like treetops. It was just coming through the treetops and then it would go back down again. So yeah, it was an experience to say the least. So now that my wife has brought me to places and vacation like in Florida. Yeah, I love the sun, and I used to sit on top of our downtown fire station during my lunch, and just sit in the sun because I just, I like just being there and just feeling the warmth.
Well,
even though my dermatologist probably says that I probably shouldn't be, going through and doing those things, but I that was something I did enjoy.
well, considering it's going to be 108 degrees here in Texas today, I'll be thinking of you as we, put fry eggs on the sidewalk and, make that happen. But obviously, this taught you resilience young. One of the things you talk about in your book is resilience. You also talk about post-traumatic stress. What are some of the ways that we can go ahead and handle post-stress and become a more resilient individual?
Well, I think it goes back to what I was saying before, that don't deny it, right? I think if you put yourself into a denial hole that, no, I'm fine, I'm, none of this bothers me, that this, I can walk into this situation and that doesn't, I'm too macho, I'm too salty, as we say in the fire service, that guy's super salty. Look at he needs, his mustache fell off because he was so salty, because he's just, he's just so macho, so intimidating. Yeah. It's true. I think, we laugh because, that we all have, there's that person, that they think that, well, whatever, it's just body parts, whatever, no big deal. I've seen that stuff, whatever. And it's just like, well, okay, yeah, fine. But you know what? That's not normal. It's not something that you should have to deal with, once, as opposed to, several times, over a course of a career. Right. So I think the first part is don't be so macho that you're not going to say that it doesn't bother you. We have to be honest and be truthful with, especially to ourselves. I mean, if it's one thing, if you're going to, put on some BS persona, and put some mask on saying, no, I'm super macho and I'm super salty, and then, get to be by yourself and you're crying. Well, that's fine. That's okay. Because that means that you're processing it, right? It means that you're working through, the horror and the hell that you just saw, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you don't want to do it in front of other people, that 100%, that's fine, right? Yeah. Especially if you're in the officer position, right? If you're the leader of the group, I think it's super important that you need to be honest with, when I was in the leadership roles, I was always probably, to a fault, too honest, about certain things, and hey, this bothered me. If it bothers anyone else, I'm here to talk about it, but you have to be open with people too, that especially if you're in that leadership role, you need to exemplify, and be truthful with who you're with. Like, hey, you know what, this is, especially when it's calls that involve, like, if you're a father, if it calls that have with kids, right?
Yeah.
Those are bad ones. Those are horrible, because you immediately think about your own kids. Right. Or if you don't have any children, you may immediately think of, nieces or nephews, or, you're going to think of something that is related to that person, the age or whatever the situation is. Or you're going to empathize a lot with the parents or the individual that is, just lost whoever they lost. Right. So, I think part of it, and, like I said, the biggest thing is don't deny the issue, right? Yeah. But it also doesn't mean that I have to sit there blabbering and be crying in front of my crew. That's also not what I'm saying, right? It's one of those fine lines that, be honest and open that it bothers you, but at the same time, be okay in the fact that you're going to need time to deal with what you just saw, And in a leadership role, when I was chief, you have to give time to that crew. Right? If something bad happened, don't just stick them on another call right away. You have to understand what just occurred and how it's going to affect them. Yeah. Right? Don't just say, suck it up. We got another call. You have another med call. Hey, med 3, get your butt out the door. Or, hey, med 2, are you done with, did you repack your med yet? Are you ready to go? Because we have 2 calls waiting in the hopper or whatever. You have to be the leader and say no. Yeah. Okay. Nope. They're out of service. They're out of service until I deem them back in service. And if that means I come down from on high, and I have to drive out to that station, or I have to physically see them, and I need to see if they're okay, because as a leader, you need to do that with your troops, right? Yeah. I'm not going to throw you back into the fire and say, all right, well, suck it up, Buttercup. And, yep, shit happens. Get your butt out there. No. I think we've come to the point where we realize that that was not the best answer to situations. That was not the best, realities that we put all of ourselves in over the last, numerous decades. So, I think we're reaching the point now that, hey, those were bad decisions that we made, and we need to learn from our mistakes, right? So, if it means you have to call mutual aid to take a call, guess what?
Yeah,
that's what we do. And if someone asks, why was Med 3 out of service? Because, whatever occurred and we had to call a neighboring district, and why was there, a delay in then you need to say, listen, this is what occurred. That whole crew had just dealt with this, and I was giving them some time, and it's on me. You want to blame someone? Blame me.
Good.
Right? So, I mean, that, so like I said, it goes back to don't deny it. Don't, don't floss over it. Don't, brush over it. Accept that it sucks and accept that it's bad, and realize that, no, it's not normal, and that if we need to take time to deal with it, we take time to deal with it. And if some people need to take more time to deal with it, then so be it.
Good. I can't thank you enough for bringing that up. It is something that comes up now a lot since I run a crisis response team. And both administrators are divided on this. I need them to get out there, blah, 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 blah. And many of them are coming to a more modern understanding, which is what you're articulating. And I found, because of the structure in the fire service and its rigidity, a lot of ways I found around this are actually quite simple. Create a protocol. They're like, what? Wait a minute. There's a protocol? Yeah, you can put a protocol in the SOGs that after a critical incident, they can go ahead and, request counseling on scene. So we come out for those. 80% of the time when my team is called, we respond 72 hours later. They finish the shift. Everything's fine. And we'll show up and either do a debriefing or a diffusing. 20% of the time, we show up right there. That will most often be a mass casualty incident, or it'll be an individual death, and that's almost always a pediatric. About 3 years ago, we had a pediatric homicide, and I made the decision to send the engine company, the paramedic unit, and one of the police vehicles home afterwards, and did the debriefing. We were out there within an hour. We were actually at the station before a couple of the units got back. Took them out of service for 3 hours, did the debriefing. And then I made the executive decision, put it on me. Let's call tomorrow's crews in right now. Let's get these people home with their family. And I would say that we were probably 80% of the administrators throughout the county really respected and appreciated that. The other 20 are like, that's not what we do. It's not how we do it.
So salty. So much mustard.
Yeah, exactly right. So I think a new way of doing business and moving forward, if we're going to actually take the behavioral health of the public seriously, we have to go ahead and take the behavioral health of our members seriously. And sometimes that means giving people the option that it is not a sign of weakness if I want to go home to my family right now and hug my kids because I just lost a child in a drowning. That makes me human, empathetic, capable, compassionate, and that also increases my resilience. So I know I can come back and do this job tomorrow. And a large part of this is having the support of your members to where we're here for each other. We call it a brotherhood, a sisterhood, and a family. But it's at times like this where you really get to see.
Let's treat it like our family, right?
Yeah, exactly. You give people the support they need and let them go ahead and take the time to process what they've got to process. It's one of the reasons that we created the Institute. That's why it's called the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute, because it's one of the things that we realized was so lacking in the training. We've got, I've been a paramedic instructor for years. I've got probably every book written on the subject. When I pull them all out one day and looked at them and tagged the pages, no book had more than 15, 20 pages in behavioral health. And over three-quarters of those pages were about chemical and physical restraint. Nothing about the behavioral health of the member at all.
No, never.
Let alone signs and symptoms of how to deal with someone who's having a psychotic break what schizophrenia is, how to deal with folks that are having, overwhelm on a crime scene, or how to go ahead and get people to process their trauma. So it was one of the things that moved me to want to go ahead and start courses. And I did so within the fire department as a training officer. Our crisis response team was started there. And then I went ahead and moved it forward as it moved into the Counseling Center of Texas. And then it moved forward into the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute. So now, it's the same team. They've just transitioned to 3 different agencies because we outgrew the department we were at. We were responding in the county. We outgrew that. We started responding statewide. And we've done some multi-state deployments. And then as the Institute was born, as a training institution, I was asked if we were going to have therapists, and I said, no, it's a teaching institution.
Yeah.
And then my advisory board said, rethink that and move the therapists over.
Sure.
And I thought about it and talked to our people over at the Counseling Center of Texas, and they said, get them new shirts and ID cards and transfer that over. And that's it now. So the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute does have board-certified psychotherapists who respond to line-of-duty deaths, who respond on scene, and do critical incident work afterwards. The question is getting us called. We love to come out and do education and training, and we love to go ahead and visit with you before a critical incident.
Yes, that's the key there, yes.
However, I will take it, and most of the time we show up because there's been an incident, and then we start a relationship that way with the department, and then we work our way backwards into the training aspect of it. But I can't thank you enough for bringing that statement to the table, and it's about thinking at a paradigm shift, I think. There's an awareness that we need to grow and change how we handle our own members, but the structure seems to lock them up. And the simplest thing I found was create a protocol. There's a protocol. Yes, that's protocol 137-5, page 3.
Yep.
Triggering a critical incident response. In one department, we had the fire chief was an old, crusty, super salty Vietnam veteran. I loved him, but he wouldn't allow this in his department. And finally, the officers committee got together, and they just voted a new set of SOGs that anybody at the rank of lieutenant or above could trigger a critical incident. Sure. And they got the chief to sign it and said, we don't want you to be the sole deciding factor. We want the people in command to be able to have that option. And he signed it, and the rest is history. And we go out and train with them regularly and work with those organizations. But it takes time to change a culture. Training and education people change cultures. Who are some of the people that inspire you as an educator, a storyteller, and a changer of culture?
Honestly, some of the best stories came from my grandpa. We called him Papa. It was my dad's dad. I mean, that guy, he could tell you, but he liked to fish. So there was fishes, it's something here. If you didn't know this, when you catch a fish, you got to take your picture you got to put the fish right in front of the camera so it looks super big, as opposed to, coming back with, hey, look at this fish. No, it's like, no, here's this giant. So he could tell a story. And,
nice.
The thing about him is that you knew his stories were true, though. He wasn't just giving you, stories for the sake of stories. He was telling you about, the different, because the guy had lived quite a life. He was born in 1917 and lived on a logging camp in the Upper Peninsula where they didn't have running water, didn't have electricity, and he saw his first vehicle driving, an actual car, right, when he was 10. And he was a hobo when he was younger, and they would hook trains and, go for rides on trains and be gone from his family. You know what I mean? Like, they would hook the train from the UP and they would ride down to Chicago and broke into the World's Fair, So, I mean, all those different things. And then World War I or World War II occurred. So then he was in the military, and getting caught and, leaving and being AWOL and, spending a lot of time in the brig in the military, all the different stories that he had, that's where it started for me. It was like, man, you'd sit there and you'd listen to, wow, Papa, that's unbelievable, all this different stuff, but you learned so much.
Yeah.
And I learned, about fishing and about walking through the woods. And hey, Mark, he would stop sometimes because I'd go with him fishing. He was really big into trout fishing for whatever reason. I think it's kind of a fishy fish, but whatever, but we would literally walk. I would drive with him through like Nowhereville, in the UP. I mean, and the UP is pretty sparse. If you're not familiar with the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, it is, I think the total population of the UP is like maybe in total of the entire Upper Peninsula, you're like maybe 70,000 people, 75,000 people in all of the Upper Peninsula. And if you look at a map, it is a giant area, right? So we would be driving and driving and driving, and then we'd stop. And then he'd be, okay, we're going to walk along this railroad track now for the next 2 miles. It's like, okay. And then he'd have a spot like by this giant white pine. He's like, okay, we're going to go in here. Okay. And then we'd walk through the bush like another mile to get to this one stream at this one point where he had caught a really big, brook trout once, like 30 years ago, and he wants to try again. It's like, okay, well, whatever. So, but all these journeys and all the travels I did with him, it was all telling me story, because this is back in the 80s when there was no cell phones. There was no, it was, quote unquote, the good old days, you know what I mean? So there, it was entertainment by talking, actually having conversations and telling me about when he was a little boy, and then walking through the woods, all that time walking, hey, Mark, see this tree? See how the moss is growing on the north side of the tree? That's how if you ever get lost, it's something you can look at. If you find a tree with a lot of moss on one side, that's usually north, and all the little things that you learn, just walking to, like, this is edible, this is not edible, or, you see this, scat, that's because this is this animal, and see how the deer's hooves, he's got hooves and he's got two little, so I mean, versus a bear paw that looks like an actual paw. I mean, all those different things, that was all stories. It was all learning and listening to Papa talk on our travels through the woods, right? So that was a huge inspiration. And then my father, who also being his kid, so he'd tell me stories about when I was in football, and this is what, our coaches did, and all these different things. And he was big into lifting, and, so I learned a lot from, just listening to him and doing the things. Okay, Dad wants me to do, so this is how this works. And, so for me, it was always about communication.
Yeah.
It was always about listening to someone else and be like, okay, what did I hear you say? So for me, as we want to get into what are the multiple types of learning, because we all learn differently.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a visual auditory learner. So I could sit here and talk to you all day and learn a whole bunch, right? My wife reads books. So she will put herself into a stack. She's a CPA, so she likes to go. So that's what she does. But that's normal for her, right? She's a book learner. I can, the reason why I wrote the book I wrote was because it was full of stories, and then my tone of voice, right? When you get into, writing and things like that, I wanted it to be more of a conversational tone. Like, hey, you're reading this like I'm sitting here talking to you, right? I wanted it to have a more personal feel to it, as opposed to a textbook.
Yeah.
Where it's always written in like a third person, very, quote unquote hospital, real rigid, and, point A and point B. Well, okay, great. But what do you remember? Right.
Yeah.
So we all learn differently. So for me, like I said, I'm a visual learner. I would sit in college and not take notes. I would just sit there and listen. And then there were a couple of little things I make sure I jotted them down, but that was it. I wasn't sitting there, trying to cram as many notes as possible, because I knew I wasn't going to learn anything.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to remember what I wrote down, So for me, from a teaching aspect, who was, instrumental it was all the people I was talking to. My cooperating teacher when I started teaching, Candy Heiderscheid, she was fantastic, right? She was more old school of, we're going to rip this Band-Aid off and you're going to teach all 5 classes day 2, Mark, and you're not using any of my materials. Oh, okay. Well, that's not how they said it was going to go. Well, Guess what? Either you're going to sink or swim. That's what and she's not wrong. It's like, yeah, well, okay. Well, We could take this the gradual way, or she's like, I can tell by looking at you, Mark, that you can handle this. Okay, great. Fantastic.
Wow.
I love the enthusiasm and the confidence in me, but at the same time that, as a teacher, when we have students, we have to know that too, right?
Yeah.
When I coached, I loved coaching girls. I was the head girls track coach for 4 years, and then I was the head boys track coach when I was down in Wittenberg. Boys versus girls, huge difference. I would get so hoarse from yelling and screaming when I was coaching football and track, because I'm constantly, I'm constantly yelling. But when I was coaching the girls, it was great. I didn't have to yell. They had so much individual, self-actualization that, hey, what's our practice for the day? Okay, well, this is the workout I got for you girls. Here's the sprinters workout. Here's the distance. Here's the mid distance. Here's the throwers. Here's your workouts for the day. And then they would just go and do it. I didn't have to yell. I didn't have to scream. I didn't have to do any of those things. It was so great. And then, which was even better, they would come to me when they were done and they thought they were early. They're like, well, we're done. Is there anything more we can do? Yes, there's always more we can do. It was such a huge difference as opposed to coaching the boys. So, you got to know who you're talking to as a teacher, right? You got to know who your audience is, and you got to know how you can relay that information the best way possible. Like I said, I was auditory. My wife's a book learner, so that's why it's important. And I kind of touched that in the book too. It's important that when you are a teacher, you have to segment that course in different things. You can't just death by PowerPoint. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna do this for the next 60 minutes. Everyone buckle down, and then the worst is I always thought it was hilarious when whoever was instructing, they'd put the number of slide count like on the slide. They'd have that on there, and it's like, oh my God, this is slide 4 of 500. Oh geez, so it's just like, we're going to be here forever, so Don't do that. That was always one of the things, like, I took the book too, like, I wanted to write it so that, number one, like you said, I wanted to write a book that someone could come back to over and over and over again. That was a resource that, you could learn something every time you went back to it. But secondarily, I wanted to write something that was easy to understand, that wasn't full of jargon, and super high terms. And you can make anything complicated. I got a couple fishing buddies on the department who they can make fishing complicated. Like well, you need this kind of a jig line, and you need this color bait, and this is the type of line, and this is the spool, and then you have to have this much weight on it because you want it to drop to this level of the lake when you're trolling it out. It's just like, man, we're just talking about fishing, like, you can make anything complicated. Like, literally anything can be complicated. But why? For what purpose, right?
Let's talk about some of the places we can find you in the near future. You've got some events coming up that you're going to be at, and tell me about the courses that you're offering and what you've got coming up in the near future. How do we find you if we want to book you for a course?
Well, I've got my website. Which is toodark30.com, which I mention in the book too. I have that website. That's my main website, and my the name is what it is. So it's written out the number 2, TWO, and then dark, and then the written out the number 30, THIRTY. So that's the main website. So if anyone wants to contact me, they can literally click on the contact button, send me an email. My email is markhill@toodark30.com, Mark with a C. My mom wanted me to have the French spelling of Mark, so it's not short for Marcus or anything. It's not. Everyone's like, "Oh, is that short for Mark?" No, it's just the French spelling of Mark.
There you go.
Yeah, très bien. Yeah, So, that's obviously that's the easiest way to get a hold of me. Otherwise, on the website, I've also got my links on the very bottom with all the social media contacts. It's Facebook, LinkedIn, all the normal kind of stuff like that. I'm going to be teaching a couple courses in a few months. There's a couple other ones that might be coming up here too. I haven't heard back yet, but I'll be down in Louisiana for the LIFT conference, Louisiana Instructors Conference. That's in February. That's the end of February, 24. And there I'll be teaching 2 sections. One about bridging the gap. So like teaching between generations, and because a lot of people they want to put everything, all the problems, it's all the millennials' fault. It's like, well, okay, well, it's millennials as a generation. Every generation thinks the one before it was the worst. So, the baby boomers, they thought that they were the generation, and then the ones before them, they were the worst. So every generation always thinks that. That's just how life is. So nowadays, it's not even so much nowadays, because I'm technically a Gen Xer, so we would blame the baby boomers. They would, so the millennials were blaming us, so that course will be, let's talk about generational issues. Let's talk about how we best relate information between the generations, which I kind of go to too in my book, talking about, knowing your audience and realizing the generational differences between the groups. So I'll be talking a section about that. And then in the second section I'll be talking about is strategic or successful strategies for being a FTO, which is something I do a lot of talks about that one. I've done trainings at different departments too, talking about, I've been brought in to kind of let's go through and let's talk about how to be a teacher, basically, how to be a successful teacher, because it's out of the wheelhouse for a lot of people. Like I said in the beginning when I talked about how paramedic was such outside of my wheelhouse, being a teacher is outside of a lot of people's wheelhouses, and it's finicky and it's complicated, and you gotta kind of know certain things, so that course is specifically designed. I go through a bunch of different strategies, how someone can, quickly, a quick abbreviated version of, how to be an effective field training officer, preceptor, whatever the title is in your department or agency that you want to use. And then I've got my course coming up for the Behavioral Health Institute, which is basically the longer version of that course, which is going to deal a lot with my book. We'll go through all 10 chapters, talking about the book itself. And I got the workbook that accompanies the main text, and we'll go through, everything there is about being an effective teacher, effective communicator, an effective evaluator, an effective communicator in all the different aspects of what it is to be a teacher, and the differing learning styles, the different learning levels. And we'll go through the whole gambit. And that'll be a 40-hour course that we'll be able to go through. And that'll be a lot of fun. And it'll be taught by me. And you'll have the joy of listening to me tell stories and discuss the different topics between each chapter of the book.
Now, it's not 40 hours in a row, is it? How does the course structure if I wanted to take that?
Yeah. It's going to be a 40-hour, 8 hours a day for 5 days. Buckle down. I hope you brought a pencil. No, it's going to be 16 weeks, okay. Right? So that, and the other thing too, it was always super important to me as a teacher that when we did assignments, I hated doing an assignment that had absolutely no value, right? Busy work for the sake of busy work just bothered me immensely, because like math, right? You need to do these 10 problem sets, or it's just like, oh my god, okay, fine. I'll go through and I'll do all the 10 problem sets. It's just repetition. There is a point to repetition, absolutely, but I like making it worth something, So for the course, through the Institute, how I scheduled and how I arranged it was, yes, it's going to be 16 weeks. We're going to cover, there's 10 chapters of the book. So some of the weeks we're going to be covering the same chapter twice, because it's bigger chapters with a lot of different concepts. So I wanted to break it into 2 separate sections. But my biggest thing was, besides going through the book and besides just going through, what each chapter entails, I wanted the assignments to actually be worth something. So each week as you go through, you're going to be creating a part of an overall larger project, which is going to deal with creating a lesson plan that will involve a scenario. So there's going to be a scenario evaluation. There's going to be checkoff lists that you're going to make. There's going to be some icebreakers that you're going to have to come up with. There's going to be some didactic, like knowledge-based, like information section that you're going to have to create to present. All the different facets that go into making a very effective lesson. That's what you're going to do. You're going to take parts of it each week, and you're going to create parts of that overall encompassing final lesson project. So at the end of the course, not only will you have gone through and read the book and gone through all the the normal workbook questions and answers and the different higher order thinking skills that are required to try to memorize, and listening to all my stories and, learning what we can learn and then learning together. Because part of my thing is discussion. Each week we're going to be talking to each other as a large group. Right. And I want to hear stories. I can drone on, we can do a PowerPoint and I'll have some talking points, but I want to hear what everyone else has to say. Yeah. I think we all get more of it out of an actual discussion than we just have, some talking head, droning on about something. So
if you're wanting to be a training officer, if you're wanting to improve how you educate others, this sounds like the course for you.
Yeah. And that was my intent that, that I want the course to be easy enough to understand, hard enough to challenge, but at the same time, I want it to be relevant enough where you can apply and use the information that we get out of the course.
Nice. As we start to wrap up today, what are some of your final thoughts or anything you want to go ahead and say to our guests?
My biggest thing is just continue to learn. No one's perfect. Realize that no one's perfect. I hate the word expert. Because expert entails that you know everything there is to know about a subject, like literally everything. And we don't. Life is a process of finding out so much more every day and reevaluating our theories and reevaluating core principles and learning and changing and growing and adapting. And, I think that if we don't do those things, if we don't continue to challenge ourselves and push ourselves, then we'll stagnate. And what happens to that, what happens to that plant that withers and dies, right? And I don't want people to do that. I try to do as many inspiring things as possible. I try to post as many things on my website and, on Facebook and LinkedIn to try to disseminate information or knowledge or challenging ideas or, thinkings or, different articles that I wrote different blogs about different topics. And, you got to do something. And making that 1% improvement every day, right? I always tell my girls when they go to practice, hey, did you get better or worse today? Right? We want to get better every day. It doesn't have to be, and we're not talking leaps and bounds, but do something better today. Do something better today than you did yesterday.
Nice.
Talk about your, in my own head at night, and I think about stuff that I could have done this, or whatever. You make your little plan for the next day, or you think about what happened that day, and it's like, okay, well, tomorrow I need to make sure I do this, or write it down. There's nothing wrong with that, but just know that we're all fallible. We all screw up. We all make mistakes. We all fail. No one's perfect. But as long as we get up and we keep going, that's the most important part.
Well, another thing you put in your book, if you don't ask, the answer is no.
Yeah. You can never, you never know, right? It's like the other one about you can't win the lottery unless you buy a ticket.
Nice.
Right. So, you can't know until you ask.
Yeah.
So,
Marc, I've learned a lot today. I've enjoyed our time together. Your book, Too Dark 30, True Stories to Inspire Teaching and Learning in Our Local Heroes, and the companion book, the official workbook. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope to have you back on another episode. Thank you for sharing your time, your wisdom, your expertise. I'm looking forward to your course, and I know others are as well. So I guess I'm going to have to say stay warm up there.
Yeah. Today it was like 68. There was the 72. I think it's going to be the high for today. So yeah, there's a warm front coming. It might be 88 later on this week. We, might have to turn my air conditioning back on as opposed to being off right now. So
there you go. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up here, and hopefully we will see you again on another episode. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You bet. I'm Joseph Brigandi. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Enroute. Enroute is a production of the First Responder Behavioral Health Institute. To learn more about us, head on over to frbhi.com.